The gavel came down once, and the Brown family's world crumbled into oblivion. This was not a TV show. This was not a scripted drama. This was real, raw, ugly, and happening in front of flashing lights, stunned fans, and a judge with no tolerance for games. For so long, Kody Brown was the self-appointed leader of his large plural family, a man who boasted about control, loyalty, and image. But today in this courtroom, that image went up in flames. And at the helm of the fire was Janelle Brown. For so long, Janelle had been the quiet one. Not as loud as Christine, not as passionate as Meri, and certainly not as tight with Kody as Robyn. Practical, steady, a woman who would opt for peace rather than war. But peace lasts only so long when there is betrayal that goes too deep. Today she wasn't there as a wife. She was not here as a partner. She was here as a warrior, calling for truth, justice, and accountability. The doors of the courtroom creaked open one morning, and the mood changed in an instant. Reporters murmured, bystanders leaned forward. Even the judge appeared ready for a tempest. Kody walked in, his once swaggering confidence lost to nervous looks. His curls weren't perfectly coiffed, his face devoid of its usual swagger. He wasn't the cocky husband of 4 wives. He wasn't the star of TLC, he was a man in the crosshairs. And seated across from him, Janelle, serene, concentrated, armed with papers and righteousness. The opening salvo landed swiftly. Janelle's attorney stood firm, his tone crisp. Your Honor, today we bring not merely a case of financial fraud, but a record of manipulation, shattered trust, and concealed secrets. From the opening sentence, the audience were captivated. And then Janelle herself had her say. Her voice wasn't trembling. It wasn't strained. It held decades of pain, frustration, and betrayal. For decades I tried to keep peace, she said. I gave my loyalty, my effort, my heart to this family. But while I built a home, Kody built lies. The courtroom gasped. She spread document after document before them. Bank transfers, property deeds, investments that disappeared mysteriously. The truth was evident. Kody had been using family money for projects that benefited him alone, and leaving wives like Janelle and the children to scramble for scraps. Kody Brown, Janelle went on, looking straight at him. You violated the trust of every woman who ever took you at your word, and you can't hide from it anymore. The room fell silent. Even Kody's attorney was speechless. But the theatrics weren't over yet, because just as people thought they'd heard the worst, Janelle went and dropped the bomb that rocked the whole courtroom. Your Honor, her attorney replied, pushing a folder across the table. We have information about Robyn Brown. Information that turns everything around. The judge arched his eyebrows. Go on. The attorney's voice grew acidic. Robyn Brown came into this family with secrets. She presented herself as a devoted wife, while the reality is, her previous marriage was never completely cut. At the moment she married Mr. Brown, ties of law and finance still existed. From Kody's other wives, from the public, and from the fans of the show. The words cut through the room like a knife. Gasps filled the air. Reporters frantically tried to record every word. Robyn, who had sat quietly in the audience, hid her face, tears streaming through her fingers. For years fans had wondered about Robyn's history. But this discovery, this was larger than rumor. It was proof, and it was now attached to a legal document. Kody went white-faced. The man who had introduced Robyn as his soulmate was now faced with the threat that they were brought together on a false premise. Kody could no longer keep quiet. He sprang to his feet, pushing aside his lawyer's urgent pleas for him to sit. This is madness, he shouted, his voice cracking. These women, they don't know what loyalty means. They're bitter, they're jealous, and they want to destroy everything I've built. His words echoed through the chamber, but they weren't received as he hoped. The judge's face hardened. The audience shifted uncomfortably. His rant sounded less like a defense and more like desperation. Kody slammed his fist on the table. Without me, there is no family, no sister wives, no fame, no fortune. They're ungrateful, all of them. And instead of sympathy, he garnered silence, and then whispers of skepticism. For the first time ever, Kody did not resemble a leader. He resembled a man disintegrating. The drama only intensified as the judge ruled on order. Witnesses testified. Even old tapes from the show itself were shown as evidence. Scenes in which Kody vowed equality, justice and affection, juxtaposed harshly with the reality Janelle had uncovered. And then came the verdict. The voice of the judge was firm, unyielding. Having considered the evidence, this court concludes that Mr. Brown abused family resources, neglected his duty of care, and behaved in such a manner as to lead to financial and emotional loss to his wives. In addition, the issue of Mrs. Robyn Brown's hidden legal involvement will be referred for additional investigation. Bang, the gavel came down, the noise ringing out like thunder through the still room. Janelle's eyes were closed, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't grinning, she wasn't gloating. This wasn't a triumph of pride, it was a triumph of truth. She had stood to the man who once ruled all, and she emerged victorious. Robyn crumpled in her seat, her polished veneer destroyed. Whatever sympathy she had once enjoyed from the public had disappeared. Her secret marriage, her clandestine attachments, they would haunt her now forever. And Kody, frozen, white as a ghost, silent. The empire he created, the power he wielded, the fiction he wove for years, all of it came crashing down with one fall of the gavel. Outside the courthouse, there was pandemonium. Cameras blazed, reporters yelled. Fans who once worshipped the family now required explanations. But Janelle didn't have to say anything. She exited those courthouse doors with her head held high. Her silence was louder than any words. For years she had been underestimated, forgotten, discarded. But today, she was the one who buried Kody on national television. The Brown family was forever altered. The trial did not merely terminate a marriage, but shattered illusions, uncovered secrets, and rewrote the future of all individuals linked to Kody Brown. And so, the tale of the Brown family, once marketed as one of faith, love, and unity, became something different altogether. A cautionary tale. A warning, evidence that a lie can only remain hidden for so long before the truth makes its way out. As the courthouse cleared, as the cameras rolled up, one thing was certain: this was no longer Kody's tale. It was Janelle's. The woman who prioritized truth over silence, justice over fear, and the world watched as Kody Brown's kingdom fell, one courtroom bombshell at a time. The courtroom was silent, and then everyone's eyes were on Janelle. A chill hung in the morning air outside the courthouse. With the snap of expectation, news teams filled the steps, microphones jutting out, cameras resting on tripods, and fans leaning against fences, all waiting for the door to open and let out the Brown family. For years audiences had watched them on television, the polygamous family who delivered love, religion, and togetherness. But what had been aired once as harmony was now falling apart right before the whole nation. Today was not about scripted shows or expertly edited interviews. Today was about reality. Inside, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Wood creaked beneath journalists, family acquaintances, and curious onlookers who pushed into every seat available. Others whispered softly, their eyes flicking towards the front, and others sat stiff and quiet, knowing that something historic was about to transpire. Seated at the middle of it was Kody Brown. Previously he had strutted around with the air of mastery of a man who was boss, the patriarch of a big family, his flowing curls and charming grin sufficient to captivate viewers and wives as well. But now, under the cold glare of the courtroom lighting, he was not the same. His shoulders hunched, his eyes darted nervously, and his jaw tightened every few seconds as if readying himself for impact. Kody had faced family conflict before. Christine's departure, Meri's estrangement, the whispers of favoritism toward Robyn. But this was different. This wasn't a family argument behind closed doors. This was a courtroom, with a judge, a jury, and evidence that could not be spun for television ratings. Janelle Brown sat directly across from him. She didn't require flashy attire or a professional smile to attract notice. Her unassuming strength carried more authority than any speech Kody had ever made. For years Janelle had been underestimated. The practical one. The one who kept the peace. The woman who got things done while others wanted the attention. But today, she wasn't standing in the background of plural marriage. Today she was Kody's most formidable opponent. The judge came in, his black robe sweeping behind him, and the conversation ceased at once. With a weighty hand, he raised his gavel, and brought it down once upon the block. "Order in the court," he declared, his voice slicing through the silence like a knife. "This session is now in progress." The sound resonated in the chamber, and in that moment the setup had been made. This was not another court proceeding. It was the start of a war that would dismantle the roots of the Brown family. The air thickened as the bailiff announced the case. Brown versus Brown. The mere words seemed unreal. The family name, once synonymous with harmony, now divided down the middle, written on court documents as a war of deceit and truth. Kody surveyed the room, his gaze passing over Janelle's face before winking out. For years he'd depended on her faithfulness. She'd been the rule-following wife, the sacrificial wife, the peacemaking wife, when others bristled. The notion that she would become the one to bring him here, to confront him in a court of law, chafed at his pride like acid. But Janelle's expression said otherwise. She wasn't shaking, she wasn't having second thoughts. Her steady, piercing eyes remained fixed on the bench. Her entire posture exuded determination. As the clerk started to read the charges, financial mismanagement, emotional neglect, secret betrayals, the courtroom broke into whispers. Spectators huddled in closer, taking notes, shaking their heads. The accusations were not small, private things. They were charges of dishonesty, of a man who had twisted trust and power for his own use. Kody squirmed uncomfortably, pulling at his tie. He seemed less a patriarch, and more a trapped man. And then came the first of the moments that would be remembered for eternity. Janelle stood up. The glide of her chair across the wooden floor caused the air in the room to vibrate. She held a pile of papers, her hands firm, and moved toward the witness stand. The silence was choking. Every eye in the room tracked her, every ear listening for her first words. As she spoke, she didn't raise her voice, but it traveled. "Years," she started. "I lived in silence. I lived among a family who promised harmony but delivered me division, who promised trust and delivered betrayal to me. I believed my loyalty, my sacrifices, my love would count for something. But what I learned," she stopped for an instant, glancing at Kody, "was that the man I trusted most was building a life with falsehood." Gasps rippled through the courtroom like fire. Kody shifted restlessly in his seat, his face set in a hard line. The reporters' pens moved with lightning speed, catching every syllable. Janelle went on, her voice unwavering. "This is not a tale of a failed marriage. This is a tale of failed promises, of funds taken under false pretenses, of children left without support, while their father followed his own aspirations." The judge's brow shot up in interest. "Mrs. Brown, you say you have proof of this?" "Yes, Your Honor," Janelle said confidently. She raised the papers in her hand. "Bank statements, property deeds, transfers that indicate where money intended for our family was redirected to accounts that only benefited Mr. Brown and his select causes." She handed the documents to her lawyer, who slid them across the table to the judge. The courtroom stirred as the papers changed hands. Kody's lawyer stood quickly. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a family dispute being twisted into something larger." But the judge silenced him with a firm look. "I'll decide what this is. Counselor, sit down." The attorney complied unwillingly, but the harm had been done. The audience had listened long enough to understand it was not about divorce or hurt. It was about betrayal on a scale no one could have imagined. Janelle's testimony went on, word by word, shattering the image that had been so painstakingly constructed by Kody over the years. She described a man who expected loyalty but offered none, who spoke of equality but treated one wife differently than the rest, who used the money that was meant for the family to ensure his own comfort. Her statements were not angry rants. They were calculated, controlled, and supported by fact. That was what made them so compelling. When she left the stand, the courtroom was transformed. The murmurs had turned to a buzz. Reporters already hammering away on their laptops, crafting headlines that would shortly flash across all the leading news sites. Janelle Brown uncovers financial deceit in court. Kody Brown accused of misusing family funds. The sister wives' empire crumbles under legal fire. Kody sat motionless, his face pale. He had expected resistance, maybe anger, maybe bitterness. But he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Janelle, the quiet, dependable Janelle, to rise as the woman who could finally dismantle him. The judge tapped his gavel lightly again. Order will proceed. But all of us present there knew. The actual trial had already commenced. And this was merely the start. The air was thick. The silence so palpable it seemed to have a life of its own. Janelle was standing there, clutching papers in her hands, her face unwavering. For years audiences had known her as the calm, pragmatic wife. But today the world was introduced to a new Janelle. One who had finally said enough is enough. She walked to the witness stand, her heels clicking softly on the floor. The echo within the chamber was steady and determined, nearly a war drum beating out the approaching battle. After sitting, she rested her hand on the Bible, made her oath, and set her back straight. This wasn't a mere testimony. This was her opportunity to finally free herself from the shackles that had held her captive for decades. The attorney walked over to her with a reassuring nod. Mrs. Brown, please explain to the court why we have come today. Janelle took a deep breath, her gaze flying once in Kody's direction. He slumped there, arms crossed tightly over his chest, mouth pressed into a thin line. For one moment she recalled the years of compromise, the sacrifices she had made for the family, the many times she kept her silence to maintain peace. That Janelle was dead. Her voice was strong and clear. We are here due to betrayal. We are here due to years of deception. And we are here because I will not remain silent any longer. The courtroom tautened. Reporters jotted down the sentence in capital letters on their notepads. Janelle held up the first paper. This is a bank statement dated 2019. Money that was meant to fund our kids' education was transferred, not into family accounts, but into an account with only Kody's name. Then money was channeled into personal ventures, land acquisitions, vehicles and lavish spending none of us knew about. The attorney waved the statement in front of the judge. Gasps of shock ran through the crowd. Here Janelle went on, holding another paper. Our property deeds. Arizona land bought under his ownership, even though he assured the wives they would have equal ownership. He assured us it was for the family, but in reality it was put in his name only. Kody's face went bright red. He lurched violently in his chair, inclining toward his attorney, whispering angrily, but Janelle did not blink. Years, she recited, her voice firm. We were instructed to sacrifice, to live modestly, to prioritize the family. But what we did not realize is that while we struggled to make ends meet, Kody was building his own authority. He was making sure that when everything broke down he would be the only one with power. The lawyer leaned forward. Mrs. Brown, are you saying that Mr. Brown deliberately withheld financial support from you and the children? Yes, Janelle answered quickly. That is precisely what I'm saying. And I have the evidence. The lawyer put additional documents in front of the judge. Each of them said the same thing. Squandered money, unequal division, promises unkept. But what struck the court the hardest wasn't the money. It was Janelle's calm. She didn't yell. She didn't weep. She talked like a woman who'd carried the burden of betrayal for too long, and was finally ready to lay it down. The judge leaned forward at one point. Mrs. Brown, why now? Why not sooner? Janelle paused, tears welling up in her eyes. Because I trusted him. Because I wanted to believe that everything that had happened was for the best of our family. Because I felt that if I remained faithful, if I remained silent, it would safeguard our kids and our future. But silence doesn't safeguard anyone. Silence only allows the abuse to go on. Her words hit the courtroom with the force of a thunderclap. Even those who had assembled anticipating drama weren't ready for the stark candor slicing through the air. Fingers of reporters danced across keyboards. Some onlookers shook their heads in shock. Others moved in, their faces a blend of sympathy and horror. Then the moment that stood even Kody's grumblings. Janelle faced him straight on, her tone more bitter than before. Kody Brown, you required loyalty. You required obedience. You informed us that this family is founded upon trust. Yet you broke every promise to each of us. You broke me. You broke the children. And today, the truth shall be told at last. The room grew quiet. Kody's face contorted, his lips curling into a snarl. But his attorney held his arm, shaking his head. If Kody erupted now, it would only serve to validate Janelle's argument. But the damage had already been done. The audience no longer saw a leader. They saw a man stripped bare, sitting in silence as the woman he had pushed aside for years tore him apart with nothing but fact. The cross-examination continued. "Mrs. Brown," Kody's attorney said with a smile, "isn't it true that you also profited from these monies, that you shared the same roof, dined on the same food, and had the same standard of living?" Janelle didn't flinch. "No, what I gained was what I worked for. I supported my children when Kody wouldn't. I created stability when he destroyed it, and I suffered through his neglect while he poured money into Robyn's home, forcing the rest of us to get by on scraps." The attorney blinked in surprise. The audience burst into mutters again. Janelle inched further into the microphone. "You can turn my words around all you wish, but the papers don't lie. Kody does." The judge hit the gavel softly. "Order, let's continue." But no one could argue with the effect. Janelle's quiet fury had burned to ashes every defense hurled at her. She was no longer the silent wife. She was the voice of every broken vow, every stifled plea for justice. By the time she finished testifying, the mood in the room had changed entirely. Janelle didn't merely present evidence, she gave a moral reckoning. Viewers who had previously been unconvinced now gazed at her with respect. Journalists muttered terms such as heroic and fearless. And Kody, he seemed smaller, deflated. The man who had once ruled over 4 wives and national recognition now appeared powerless, shrinking under the burden of Janelle's testimony. As she left the stand, the room was silent. Then gradually applause erupted from the rear of the room. The judge quickly struck his gavel. "Order, this is a courtroom, not a playhouse." But it was too late. The point had been made. Janelle had just annihilated Kody, not with yelling, not with name-calling, but with irrefutable fact. And everyone knew this was just the tip of the iceberg. Objection sustained. Until the truth is crystal clear. The judge's voice cut through the quiet, as the clerk placed a fat manila folder upon the bench. The seal had been broken just moments before by Janelle's lawyer. And since then the whole courtroom had leaned forward, as if gravity itself was drawing them into the tale hidden behind those pages. Janelle sat up straighter now, the tempest of session 2 lingering around her like hum. Kody appeared as though he'd rather disappear into the upholstery of his chair. And Robyn, fists clenched so tightly her knuckles had whitened, continued to fix the folder with a gaze, as if it were an open pit to the past she hoped would never happen. "Counsel," the judge said, "you may proceed." Janelle's attorney moved into the strip of light between counsel tables and the bench. No acting. No uncertainty. Just the unwavering rhythm of one who knows the next 10 minutes could warp an entire story in two. "Your Honor," he began, "what we're about to present is not gossip, not speculation. It's a timeline, supported by public filings, notarized signatures, and financial records, that establishes one thing: when Robyn entered this family, her previous legal marriage was not cleanly severed. Significant legal and financial ties remained active, ties concealed from the other spouses, and materially relevant to the court's assessment of honesty, disclosure, and intent." A collective inhale rippled through the gallery. Reporters poised their pens. Someone in the back whispered, "No way," and then swallowed the words, as if they'd burned. "We call our first witness," the lawyer said. "Miss Albright." A woman in a gray blazer approached the stand. Stance pure courthouse. Rehearsed, accurate, unshakable. She was sworn in. Announced her name. Declared her role, records custodian for the county recorder's office. And placed her hands together as if they were constructed to keep truth upright. "Miss Albright," the attorney asked, "describe for the court what these documents are." She pushed her glasses up on the bridge of her nose. "This series contains a petition for dissolution, a stipulation as to marital property, a quitclaim deed, and a joint banking affidavit. The filings take 22 months. From when to when? From mid-year until almost 2 years hence. And the legal importance? The process of dissolution wasn't finished until the last decree, dated close to the end of that time. Before that, the parties were still legally bound by a number of instruments, including a joint account for mortgage and insurance payments." He left the words suspended. The judge leaned forward. Kody's eyes flashed at Robyn and away, as if even a glance might spark something combustible. "Did these documents ever get sealed?" the lawyer asked. "No," the witness said. Their public record. Thank you. He faced the judge. Permission to publish exhibit FARD to the court. Granted. On the screen, a ledger opened into view. Numbers stretched in tidy rows. Dates ticking with patient deliberation. The lawyer drew a line with a telescoping pointer. This, he added, is a payment on property insurance made 6 weeks following Robyn's spiritual marriage to Mr. Brown. The payer of record? A joint account shared by Robyn and her ex-spouse. Robyn winced involuntarily, as if the date itself had hit her. Your Honor? Kody's lawyer leapt to her feet. These are ordinary wind-down transactions. Most divorces involve a transition phase, joint obligations, and I do not contest that, said Janelle's attorney soothingly. What I contest is disclosure. Mrs. Brown's relationship, as it was presented to the family and to the public, suggested a fresh start. These documents indicate the opposite. An ongoing secret entanglement, legal, financial, and material to trust. The judge held up a hand. Let us stick to facts, counsel. Proceed. Another witness was called, a gentle title officer with the serenity of a lighthouse. She verified the filing date of the quitclaim deed, months following the spiritual ritual, and testified that up to that time, the property was still burdened by the earlier marital interest. Which means, she summarized, any indication of clear title at that time would have been inaccurate. The term inaccurate fell more forcibly than an accusation. Inaccurate meant you might end up there accidentally, or you might end up there by design. Your Honor, the attorney said. We now call, he consulted his notes, Pastor Whitlow. A silver-haired gentleman rose, one hand on a well-used Bible as he was sworn in. He told the court he was the minister at the spiritual union. Pastor, the attorney asked softly. Were you informed of any outstanding legal ties from a previous marriage during the ceremony? No, he replied, tone level. I was told the other relationship was finished. Finished, or officially concluded. He hesitated. I was assured it was taken care of. I understood that to mean concluded. And had you known it wasn't settled, had you known financial connections were ongoing, would you have gone forward the same? The pastor's eyes grew soft with a kind of regret. I would have demanded complete transparency first. A whisper ran through the courtroom. Nothing at all like the gasps. Earlier but deeper somehow. Like the groan of an old building when the wind moves and the beams recall they're under pressure. Kody's attorney stood. Your Honor? Again, this is a family's private faith practice. There is no allegation of illegality here. Merely loose ends and poor phrasing. Counsel, the judge said. I'm assessing credibility and disclosure in a domestic matter. These questions go to the heart of both. Robyn's eyes glistened. She didn't wipe them. She let the tears gather like confession. Janelle's attorney went back to the timeline. The issue is not that it takes time to get a divorce. The issue is that while Miss Brown brought a story of closure to this family, and enjoyed the benefits of that story, she pursued 2 tracks. One life in reality, another life on paper, with assets and debts going both ways. He clicked to the next document. The screen lit up with a scanned email, short, official, stamped with a county domain. This, he said, is a notice of delayed recording of the final decree because of an outstanding support calculation. Date stamped months after the spiritual ceremony, and weeks after a public statement suggesting the past was all closed. Kody gazed at the floor then, as if the tiles would provide answers the individuals couldn't. Your Honor, the attorney concluded. We move to call Mrs. Brown. The courtroom breathed. Robyn rose, adjusted her skirt, and traversed the aisle that seemed longer walking forward than it had proceeding in. She was sworn in with a voice that shivered once, then solidified. Mrs. Brown, the lawyer said softly, almost kindly, were you legally married before entering your spiritual union with Mr. Brown? Yes. And was that legal marriage fully dissolved at the time of the spiritual ceremony? A beat, not fully. The decree wasn't finalized yet. Did you tell the other wives that? Her throat worked around silence. I told them it was over. Over emotionally or over legally. She closed her eyes for a moment, just one. I said it was handled. I shouldn't have used that word. Why did you? Because I was afraid, she murmured. Because I'd already lost so much. Because I thought, honestly, that the paperwork was a technicality, and that what counted was the life that we were creating. I didn't want to frighten them. I didn't want to lose my footing before it had even begun. Your place? He inquired. She gazed downward. In the family. He nodded once, barely perceptibly. Let's discuss money. During the months following the ceremony, were bills paid out of a joint account with your previous spouse? Yes, she replied. Some? Property insurance? Yes. Mortgage? Sometimes? Did you share that with the other wives? No, she said, eyes brimming now. I told myself it was temporary, that it would be unfair to sadden them with things that would be resolved any day. But they weren't resolved any day, the lawyer said. Not ungenerously. They took months. Almost 2 years to finally unravel. Yes. And for those months, you represented your previous marriage as final, your finances as self-sufficient, and your title as settled. She gulped. Yes. Kody's attorney was on his feet. Your Honor, we're not litigating morality. We're litigating material harm. Where is the harm? The judge didn't look at him. He looked at Robyn. Mrs. Brown, did your incomplete disclosures influence the family's decisions about property, inheritance planning, or residence? Robyn's answer traced itself across her face before she spoke. Yes, she said quietly. We made choices that assumed finality. And were those decisions to your advantage? Silence enfolded the room. Sometimes, she said. Janelle's lawyer took a step back. No further questions yet. Kody's lawyer approached the witness stand with the soft ferocity of someone scrubbing glass with steel wool. Mrs. Brown, changes are ugly. You did what you thought was right, didn't you? I tried to, she said. You did not commit fraud. You did not steal. You were closing a book. I withheld information, she said. The confession tiny and colossal at once. That was wrong. And you regret that? Yes. He nodded as if that concluded it. No further questions. But it didn't conclude anything. The air didn't brighten. The faces didn't relax. Because intent was important, yes. But so was effect. And the effect was a family shifting funds and making vows in the shadows. The judge spoke directly to Robyn. Mrs. Brown, the court is not in business to punish mistakes. We are here to see the truth and its consequences. In subsequent answers, be straightforward. Anything less will not help you. Yes, Your Honor, she replied. The second witness was a surprise. A past family accountant, hired for a year while the family budget attempted to conduct an orchestra with half the instruments out of tune. Did you flag discrepancies? The attorney inquired. Yes, replied the accountant. Over and over again. The problem wasn't amounts. It was clarity. I requested segregation of accounts and simple reporting. I was informed, sometimes, that particular payments were temporary or being handled elsewhere. I suggested suspending joint investments until prior obligations were completely settled. Were your recommendations heeded? Partially, she replied. Sometimes only after tension. By whom? She glanced at the table where Robyn and Kody were seated, those overseeing the consolidated budget. Something in Kody's stance stiffened, jaw clenched, shoulders back. But the photo looked less like strength and more like a person preparing for weather he'd ignored until the roof started to leak. Janelle sat and watched unblinking. Not victory, not even release. Only the stunned acknowledgement that the thing she'd sensed, the tug she'd felt running their lives off-center, had always existed. Your Honor, the attorney said, voice mollifying, we're not asking endings to happen at once. We are asking honesty to. He set the folder down and allowed the lid of silence to fall. The judge looked at Robyn once more. Do you want to make anything clearer? She nodded, and the nod appeared to be courage borrowed from an older self. I loved my children, she said. I wanted stability. I thought if I revealed the entire mess, I'd be considered baggage. I thought I was being smart by sanitizing the story. I was wrong. I was wrong to hide. I was wrong to let fear name itself wisdom. The words did not clear her, but they did not ring false either. A voice came out of the back. A reporter who had lost his head. Do you regret becoming a member of the family? The bailiff shouted order, and the question evaporated. But its echo hung in the corners of the room. Robyn did not respond to it verbally. Her eyes did. The judge stacked the exhibits with a man placing delicate items on a shelf. This line of testimony bears considerable relevance to credibility and to the division of property and support, he said. The court will receive the timeline, the financial exhibits, and the witness testimony into evidence. We will also ask for supplemental briefing on how these disclosures or the failure thereof overlap with assets at issue. Kody shoved his chair back as if to rise, but his lawyer grasped his sleeve, a discreet leash to strategy, the need to speak, to assert control over the story, coiled inside him like a spring. But Session 3 had altered the physics in the room. The more he yelled, the sharper the contrast grew between assertion and established fact. Janelle sat motionless, not smirking, not grim, just steadfast. The mountains are steadfast after storms that bow trees to the ground. A thunder rumbled across the battered sky outside. Inside, nobody stirred. The judge looked at the clock, and then the faces, some clammy with shock, some pinched with the satisfaction of knowing they had guessed, some just worn out from lives lived under the brittle glow of secrets. We'll recess for 15 minutes, he announced, gavel raised. When we come back, we'll hear from the respondent. The term respondent hung suspended, like an arrow aimed. Kody shut his eyes. He opened them. He gave a single nod to no one. Bang! The gavel came down. The room burst the way rooms do when tension has had nowhere to go. Voices cut off. Feet scraping, cameras flashing back into hunger. Reporters scooped for the hallway. Phones already buried in ears. Phrases spilling like sparks. Undisclosed ties. Not finalized. Timeline contradicts narrative. Robyn stood up, moving slowly as though draped in grief like a heavy shawl. She didn't seek Kody's hand. She didn't seek anyone's. She stood at the door and took a step. Another, discovering the contours of consequences. Janelle didn't rise immediately. She gazed at the vacant witness chair, at the lightweight microphone that had borne so many gentle deceptions and brutal realities, and then at the folder now shut on the judge's bench. The storm outside growled once more, and she thought, not of triumph, but of oxygen, of air finally circulating through rooms closed for years. Families had stood in the corridor, fans amongst them, faces against the glass, as at an aquarium where fish have discovered they swim in a sea of eyes. Questions banged at the doors but were not yet words, merely noise. By the time the doors were opened, Session 3 had remade the day. 15 minutes. Then the court would come back. And the man who had constructed this family as his narrative would need to speak within another person's reality. The gavel came down, and recess was over. The courtroom doors swung open to let people back in. The air was heavier now, laced with the tempest that Session 3 had unleashed. Robyn's tears, her admissions, and the brutal truth of papers exposed had shattered the family's flawless veneer. Now it was Kody's time, and all eyes were on him. He came back in with shoulders squared, lawyer by his side, mouthing frantic last-minute maneuvers. But it was unmistakable. Kody was shaken. The swagger he'd worn like armor had faltered, leaving a man trapped between fury and desperation. His gaze darted around the courtroom, to the judge, to the press, to Janelle, as if he was looking for an anchor in waters that no longer responded to him. The judge's voice penetrated. Mr. Brown, now it is your turn to reply. Kody stood up slowly, holding the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. His attorney nodded to him wordlessly, begging him for restraint. But restraint had never been Kody's forte. He rose from his seat, throat cleared. Your Honor, I have heard hours of accusations, lies, half-truths turned into daggers directed at me, and I will not sit here in silence while my family, my reputation, my own character is dragged through the mud. His voice broke, higher than ever before, the sort of tone more in place for reality television shouting matches than in a courtroom. Pencils from reporters cribbled across pages, cameras zoomed in tight, and the tension cranked higher with every sentence. Kody shook his finger in Janelle's direction. This woman, my wife for decades, gained from all that I gave her. She lived with me, drove vehicles I purchased for her, enjoyed a life made available through my effort. And now she wants to characterize me as a villain. The crowd gasped. Janelle didn't budge. She sat still with hands clasped, eyes calm but uninterpretable. Kody kept going, striding back and forth now, his arms waving. I created this family. I named them, housed them, provided a show that fed them. Without me, none of them would have the platform that they're currently using to turn against me. Do you think TLC would have called if it weren't for me? Do you think America was interested in Janelle, Christine, or even Robyn prior to me putting us out there? His words hung bitter in the air. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. Mr. Brown, control yourself. But Kody wasn't finished. They don't understand loyalty, Your Honor. They never did. Every wife I've had has wanted control, power, attention, and the moment they didn't get it, they turned on me. That's what's happening here. They are rewriting history, making me into some kind of monster, when all I've ever done, is try to lead this family. The judge's eyes hardened. Mr. Brown, this is not a theater for tantrums. This is a court of law. You will limit your remarks to the facts. But the warning only seemed to ignite him further. Kody pounded a fist on the table. The facts? The facts are that I devoted my life to these women. And what did I receive in exchange? Disrespect, rebellion, a never-ending war in my own home. Now they come here, waving papers and manipulating dates to ruin me. His lawyer tugged his sleeve, whispering urgently, but Kody shook him off. The courtroom was no longer a legal battleground to him. It was a stage, and he was determined to deliver his performance, even if it meant self-destruction. Attempting to rein him in, his attorney finally did intervene. Your Honor, what my client is trying to say is that context is important. Finances are complex in a family, particularly in a plural marriage. Yes, finances were shared. Yes, properties were transacted. But these were not fraudulent acts. These were acts of survival, of management, of keeping together a household larger than most people can even imagine. He addressed the jury, his voice soothing. Picture 4 families of children. One man attempting to bring stability to them all. Errors? Yes. Misunderstanding? Possibly. But deliberate harm? No. My client is charged with betrayal. But what he was really doing was attempt to hold together something that was destined to fail from the beginning. It was a good argument, rational, even sympathetic. But the harm from Kody's initial outburst had already been done. His fury continued to hang in the air, suffocating the lawyer's well-considered words. Janelle's attorney stood up calmly. Your Honor, may I respond? He addressed the jury. You heard Mr. Brown say he constructed this family. He provided for them. Let us examine what he provided. He provided broken promises. He provided economic instability, while sending money to support one wife more than the others. He provided a front for television while in the background. His family broke apart piece by piece. He moved deliberately, allowing his words to sink in. Leadership isn't control. Leadership isn't shouting down opposition. Leadership is sacrifice. And what did Mr. Brown sacrifice? Nothing. He asked for loyalty but never paid it forward. The lawyer took his seat again. The two sides could not have contrasted more starkly. One calm voice, measured, exact. The other loud, mercurial, emotional. Kody stood up once more, his voice shaking now, desperation entering his voice. You don't get it. None of you do. I loved these women. I loved them. Everything that I did was to protect the family. Yes, perhaps I chose Robyn over them. Yes, perhaps I erred. But is that a sin? Is being human a sin? He glanced about the room, his eyes beseeching now, not commanding. They treat me like I'm some kind of monster who plotted against them. But I was simply trying to survive within a marriage no one on the outside can ever comprehend. For an instant, the courtroom grew silent. Some of the faces were softened. Sympathy flickered however faintly. Then, like thunder after lightning, recollection of Janelle's testimony and Robyn's confession came back. The sympathy dissipated. The facts bore down more heavily than his entreaties. The judge reclined, examining Kody. Mr. Brown, this court doesn't sit in judgment of your character as a husband. We are here to establish the veracity of your actions. Fiscal, legal, and moral. Outbursts and emotional appeals will not obliterate evidence. If you want to assist your cause, I would suggest that you offer clarity, not chaos. Kody slumped back in his chair, his chest laboring. His lawyer's pen was scribbling wildly, in an attempt to extract what could be salvaged. But the vision of a confident leader had toppled. What was left was a man unraveling, falling apart under stress, attacking those whom he once dominated. Janelle remained motionless, her face an inscrutable mask. She didn't smile, she didn't taunt, she just sat there, the quiet in her presence more voluminous than any of Kody's declarations. And the people, they had witnessed enough. They had witnessed the burning indictment, the frantic justification, the fissures that spread by the minute. The one who had asserted power, who had exhorted loyalty, had demonstrated himself, not as a leader, but as a man slipping from control. As the judge finally adjourned for the day, the air was tense. Journalists scrambled for the doors, primed to scream headlines. Kody Brown blows up in courtroom tantrum. Judge warns sister wives patriarch. Clarity, not chaos. Kody sat, eyes fixed on the table, hands shaking slightly. All around him, the kingdom he had created was disintegrating, not with a single deadly strike, but with an inexorable, inevitable unspooling. This wasn't the end, but it was close, and tomorrow the gavel would fall again. The quiet before the verdict was not silence. It was a held breath that was shared by everybody in the room. The courtroom slowly filled as if every individual was afraid that the moment they arrived, the choice would become real. Reporters eased into benches with their phones on silent, lenses covered like shut eyes. The bailiff stood like a statue, and even the ceiling fans moved more quietly, blades whispering air with respect. Outside, the storm that had threatened all afternoon at last leaned its forehead against the windows. Gray, a rumbling witness. Kody sat at the defendant's table, shoulders squared but tense, as if braced against an unseen wall he refused to acknowledge, stood. His attorney leaned into his ear, words of appeals, of optics, of tone, but they were lost under the beat of a truth no strategy could temper. Robyn's fingers were clasped in her lap, fingers intertwined tight, a ring rotating slowly, as if time itself could be turned back under her finger. Janelle lowered her head, and took a breath, one deep, calculated breath that was flavored with rain and resolve. The side door creaked open. The judge appeared. They all rose to their feet. "Sit down," he directed, and the room complied. He looked over the file on his desk, as if it were an old acquaintance he had no desire ever to lay eyes on again. Then he raised his eyes, cool, unhurried, stern as the edge of a plumb line, and spoke. "This issue," he started out, "has not been easy. Families are not often, but the law, at its finest, is not here to do your relationships. It is here to weigh your behavior." A flicker crossed Kody's face, defiance battling fear. Janelle stared ahead. Not at the judge. Not at Kody. But at something just beyond the bench. As if her destiny had gone in the gallery, and was expecting its name to be read. "I will distill the findings," the judge went on, "so that the record indicates the court's rationale." He touched a fingertip to the first page. First, the record reveals a trend of economic domination by Mr. Brown that enriched one family at the expense of others, in violation of repeated promises of fair assistance. Transfers, titling of property, and discretionary expenditures were done secretly, and on occasion, contrary to mutual understandings and oral agreements. Although the court is aware that domestic life involves informal agreements, the scope and secrecy of these choices blur the distinction between discretion and violation. He flipped over a page. The paper creaked louder than paper should. Second, the court does not judicialize spiritual unions, but where legal and financial entanglements continue from an earlier marriage, and the entanglements are hidden, portrayals of autonomy become materially misleading. The record on the background of Mrs. Robyn Brown's earlier legal entanglements is admitted not to shame, but to explain the family made decisions with less than full information. That has consequences. A shiver ran along the benches. Robyn did not weep. She merely nodded her head in acceptance, the manner of one who nods at a wave one did not wish to notice until it crashed. Third, behavior in this courtroom counts. Squealing, browbeating, and theatrics can't replace evidence. Leadership is not obnoxiosity. The court heard Mr. Brown's attitude and balanced it against the papers. It did no service to his case. The gavel did not fall. It had no need to. The words spoke heavy enough. The judge clasped his hands. Accordingly, the court orders the following relief. The room held its breath once again. Item 1. A forensic accounting will get underway in 10 days. A court-appointed independent auditor will examine the last 4 years of family finances, including transfers, titles, and discretionary spending. All of the accounts, personal and joint, are open to examination inasmuch as they overlap with family support. A pen bounced from a reporter's fingers, hit the floor, and rolled under a bench like a small, frightened animal. Item 2. Restitution. Until the final report of the audit, the court creates an interim restitution fund of $500,000. Mr. Brown is directed to pay this amount within 30 days into a court-appointed escrow account. Disbursement to the spouses will be after the auditor's report and the doctrines of equitable restitution. Kody jerked back, as if the figure had been hurled at him. His lawyer's hold on his forearm increased. Don't say anything. Item 3. Injunction. Immediate effect. Mr. Brown shall not transfer, encumber or otherwise dispose of property pertaining to family assets without written permission from the auditor or the court. Disobedience will be considered contempt. The storm raging outside buckled the windows. The glass maintained its strength. Item 4. Corrections of titles. Properties purchased during the relevant period and held under the title for the families will be retitled into a provisional family trust subject to the allocation plan of the audit. Mortgage payments will be allocated accordingly. Robyn exhaled, the sound you could hardly notice unless you were waiting for the instant when someone finally embraces the form of the truth. Item 5. Disclosure compliance. Mrs. Robyn Brown is directed to furnish complete documentation of the previous dissolution timeline, joint obligations, paid during overlap, and any third-party reimbursement connected with those obligations. This is not corrective, it is curative. The court also sends the issue of disclosure disparity before the county's Domestic Relations Review Board for review. No presumption of wrongdoing occurs. He hesitated there, and the hesitation was bittersweet. Such a hand laid on a splintered shoulder. Item 6. Children. This order does not alter custody or parenting time. But the court instructs all parties to avoid discussion of these proceedings with minor children, save in terms appropriate to the age of the child and, ideally, with the intervention of a licensed family counselor. A status conference will be scheduled separately to monitor compliance. Kody's chin dropped. Whether out of relief or regret, no one could tell. Finally the judge declared, voice soft but firm, the court cautions all concerned. Fame does not make a good lawyer. Cameras cannot bear your loads. When you decided to bring your lives into the public square, you did not exchange your duties to each other. You are still pledged to honesty, to fairness, and to the well-being of the children who never asked to be the objects of your tale. He raised the gavel, not as a weapon but as punctuation. This court finds for the petitioning spouse on the claims of breach and inequitable support. The orders just described are entered and will be reduced to writing by end of day. We are adjourned. Bang. The sound radiated outward, through hearts, through history, through headlines waiting to be written. For a moment, everyone remained still. Then there was motion again. The rustle of fabric, the scuffling of benches, the clanging of cameras snapping back to existence. The bailiff demanded order as if trying to coax thunder into clouds. Kody sprang up too quickly, and needed to catch himself against the table. His lawyer started talking about what came next, about stays, about appeal windows, but Kody didn't appear to listen. He stared at the area where the judge had sat, as though the man could suddenly re-emerge, and provide a do-over, a more benevolent edit. Robyn sat, staring at her hands. One tear dropped. Not splashing, but vanishing into her palm. Janelle stood last. She didn't appear victorious. Victory announces itself. She appeared free. Not giddy, not victorious. Just, free. Like someone who has been holding something heavy for so long that her arms had forgotten how to dangle at her sides. In the corridor, the world stormed back. Microphones unfurling like flowers. Lights bursting white on faces that had mastered how to endure them. Miss Brown, Miss Brown. A comment? Janelle, are you vindicated? Kody, will you appeal? Robyn, did you conceal the truth? Janelle's lawyer raised his hand. One quick statement, he said. Janelle stepped to the line of tape on the floor that someone had placed there to keep chaos from swallowing order. This was never about revenge, she said, her voice steady as a metronome. This was about fairness, and about telling the truth even when it hurts. We'll comply with the court's orders, and we'll protect our children. That's all. They yelled more questions. She didn't reply. She went through the din like a boat through chop, slow and certain. Kody came out a few minutes later into another weather. A gust of questions, the wind of suspicion. Did you channel money? Do you apologize for the outburst in court? Was Robyn privileged? Will you relinquish finance control? He held up two hands, palms open, the hand signal of truce or defeat. No comment now, his attorney said. But Kody could not help it. I loved my family, he replied, his voice parched. I did what I thought was best. We'll go over the order. This isn't finished. It wasn't disobedience. It wasn't remorse. It was the voice of a man halfway onto a bridge that had started to creak. Robyn went by, without pause. She had no words, only a gesture, onward. By nightfall, the tale had splattered across monitors like paint thrown at a wall. Ticker tapes, court orders, audit in Brown case. Restitution fund established. Panelists inclined toward panels to analyze the ruling. Clips long past aired along with freshly coined words. Opinion occupied areas, facts left vacant. The following morning, the court-appointed auditor came with a team and a rolling cart loaded with file boxes and sealed envelopes. They took up space in a windowed conference room, the type for neutral truths, and went about their unhurried, painstaking work. Spreadsheets flowered. Ledgers came alive. Patterns that had existed in shadows stepped into fluorescent light. Kody stood back, unable to resist wandering to the doorway, like a moth thinking the light might pardon him. His attorney discussed compliance, deadlines, cooperation. Kody nodded, but couldn't help stealing a glance at the mathematics of punishment. Robyn arrived once with a Redwell folder and slid it across the table to the auditor. A paper and ink-thin apology. No words, only compliance, and the quiet dignity of one who'd resolved that the truth, no matter how belated, was preferable to the previous warmth of the lie. Janelle did not linger. She knew from experience that gawking at the stigmata does not heal them. She made her disclosures, nodded to what was to be answered, and then returned home to a living room that was no longer a waiting room. She nodded to tea. She flung open windows. She phoned a child and heard a tale of a small, goofy triumph that was utterly unrelated to codes of law. That night, Christine phoned. Meri texted, a brief word of cautious repair. None of it fixed anything. All of it healed something. Days unwound into their own sort of verdict. With no cameras, no speeches, life wore smaller noises. Janelle bought groceries with the calm of someone no longer sizing up purchases as tactical withdrawals. Robyn's feet slowed. She replied difficult questions over dinner at the table where she'd once mastered recipes for harmony. Kody stood among a garage full of boxes marked old records and memorabilia, and understood there is no box marked control. Only the delusion that if you cram it all in tight enough, it won't shift. When the auditor submitted the interim report, it was like weather, fronts shifting, pressure leveling, a chart of how storms are made when warm belief comes up against cold fact. The recommendations were obvious: reimbursement, corrected titles, open budgets, a way hacked through the tangle of a life that had been permitted to run amok. On a late afternoon bathed in clean light, Janelle strolled a well-known route in a nearby park. The sky washed blue, after so many gray days. Children laughed somewhere off to the right. A dog barked as if voice were a joy. She recalled the judge's words. Leadership is not loudness. She recalled her own. This was about fairness. She did not replay the gavel strike. She relived the second afterward. The first second that her heart, weighed down so long, understood it could be borne by something besides will. At home she lingered a beat too long in her doorway, taking in the everyday things. A pile of mail, a coat on a chair, the silence. She smiled, a small, precise smile. And then she put down her keys and did the work that always follows verdicts, deciding the next right thing. Across town, Kody sat at a kitchen table he'd once thought of as command central and gazed at a blank legal pad. He scribbled down one word, plan, and then boxed it, hoping that naming and encasing could help construct a bridge back to the life he desired. It wouldn't, but it could create a bridge to the man he still could become. If he ever learned what the judge had attempted to instruct him, that power without justice is simply commotion. Robyn closed a laptop and opened a notebook, ink gliding across clean pages. I'm sorry, began the first line. Not to the cameras, not to the crowds, to the people who truly needed to hear it. She didn't rehearse, she didn't edit, she told the truth, and it did not kill her. It simply left the door unlocked for something better to come in. The storm passed. It did its thing, washed and warned. The courthouse was back to its usual stories. Other lives stepped up onto the docket. But for the Browns, the sound that remained wasn't the gavel. It was the quiet that comes after when a house has at last been aired out. A small, unmistakable freshness, the gentle clap of curtains choosing to move again. This chapter did not close with thunder. It closed with weather you could live in. And as night enveloped itself around a city that had watched too much, a woman who had been overestimated for years switched off her bedside lamp, drew in the simplest prayer she knew, and slept, not like a person who had won but like a person who had spoken the truth and lived it.